the most, I chose a question that was asked by an anonymous attendee in the Q&A box. One, because I think it really encompasses all the work that you all have done. And I think it will be a great question. And it relates to what I'm doing too. So I'm super excited to hear what your all thoughts are. So first, I say hello. I hope it is okay for me to ask a question related to intersectionality. And apologies if this is too long. Some scholarship I have read has expressed concerns with the institutionalization of intersectionality in academia and research. On the one hand, it is great that intersectionality has become a common part of scholarly analysis and research. On the other hand, there is concern that the mainstreaming and institutionalization of intersectionality strips it of its connections to social justice and risks making it just another tool to check off a scholar/researcher's list without meaningfully engaging with the radical roots. I am wondering if the panelists have insights related to this.
Let me
go ahead, Dr. Brewer.
I was just going to quickly respond, since one of the authors in this wonderful volume, pioneer in this field, Patricia Hill Collins, I would recommend reading her more recent book, where she very much addresses these issues and moves toward what she calls a critical intersectionality. Obviously we live in a market-driven society, and very much resonating with the last presentation on the neoliberal university. To make a long story short, it's being very deeply addressed in the intersectionality book that you should get by Patricia Hill Collins, as well as understanding the neoliberal academy and how all of this becomes cachet for careerism. And I would use that as my entry or my portal for thinking about and responding to that particular question.
I would second follow that up with, again, referencing Nash's work, Black Feminism Reimagined. That first chapter, I believe it was the first chapter, the first two chapters, the intro, maybe chapter 1, specifically addresses that issue as well. How intersectionality has been institutionalized and taken up, I guess, with some degree of insincerity by certain actors to promote a kind of false dialogue about diversity and inclusion, and how, you know, the real politics around the meaning of intersectionality gets lost, hijacked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think with, Frieden and I spent a lot of time talking about this. We were highly influenced by Jennifer Nash and some other scholars who really, problematize the way that, intersectionality is not only watered down, but, one of the things that Frieden and I talked about is this growing disdain for it. And I think that, while it's easy to talk about that in the public sphere, it's like, oh, conservatives, it's like the most hated word of the year. I think it was one of these polls put out, right? But I think also within the field, there's an annoyance with this idea of intersectionality as some burden or some too easy a critique on work that isn't intersectional, right? This is all, I think very interesting for me because, when I think of Du Bois, I think of like the original intersectional scholar, right? I think of someone who saw sociology as intrinsically lying at the intersections. In fact, that it was only bad sociology that could not address the intersections of, of demography, of experience, of lenses, of futures, et cetera. And so, I think it's very interesting that this field, sociology, sort of expressly is built upon an intellectual terrain to map those intersections. And yet, we have, a very, white male dominated field that has seen that as somehow, some soup of the day that's being served up, and that, they're waiting for this trend to pass in the field. I think the field is built upon it. I mean, when you look at, Du Bois's original work, when you read the appendices of talking about Black women domestics, right, in Philadelphia Negro, it is built upon this.
And oh, go ahead. Oh, hi, Jasmine. Sorry.
No, please answer it.
Oh, yes. I was just thinking about this precarious relationship between being institutionalized and being free in the academy. And while I started my doctoral experience in sociology at UC Santa Barbara, I had the opportunity once in a lifetime from my dear mentor advisor, Dr. Nikki Jones, to transfer to UC Berkeley in African American studies. And what I loved in that field of study is, one, we come from a social movement, but also two, intersectionality held everything together. And it's not something that's admonished, but is central. In fact, in the way in which we can individually craft our unique understanding and perspectives of intersectionality. I think people expect it just to tell them what to do, and you want to count intersectional identities. I remember articles were published that said, oh, there are 178 ways you can be intersectional. That's not, you can't quantify intersectionality. And so my hope is that while things are institutionalized in the sense that it can change, it is mutable, it is transforming consistently, it can do amazing things, but it's when we just expect it to be static and unchanging is when it creates a lot of violence and harm in our conversations and our research, and why ultimately students and ourselves can feel disempowered.
I love that. Dr. Grundy, did you want to add on?
Yeah, I mean, it just reminded me of, I love this love fest we're having for sociology and anthropology at Spelman College, because it is the place that birthed me. And it just reminded me of the genealogy that we have as scholars to our students, because I actually did not know that there was a way to do sociology that wasn't intersectional, because, and we didn't even need a word for it. To us, it was the science, because everything we read, everything we studied methodologically, empirically, and otherwise came from that scope. This is absurd to say. When I went to grad school, I did not know Black women were marginalized in the field. I thought the field was dominated by Black women, because it was everything I knew about sociology had accounted for Black feminism. And so there's a way in which the field is perturbed by intersectionality because it feels like it's being forced upon it. But that's only because we teach the field as though there's a way to do it without intersectionality. And I think that's the power in our pedagogy, that's the power in our graduate training, is to center it in a way that sociology is unrecognizable if it's not intersectional.
I think that's a really great segue to one of the questions that came in that really has to do with the relationship between Black feminism and sociology. So the question reads, and this is from Alexander Holt. It reads, considering the histories of epistemological, intellectual, political, physical, and even spiritual resistance that is foundational to the Black feminist project, how would you all respond to the idea that the discipline of sociology, through virtue of the discipline's seeming foundation and continued engagement with normativity, is an irredeemable, closed-minded intellectual project? How would you all respond to the perspective that Black feminist and/or radical Black feminist configurations transgress and transcend disciplinarity?
Well, I'll start again. The transgressive move is not to be locked in the academy, because the work that we're doing in a political moment such as the one that we're in requires the kind of, I would say, dialectic between what's going on in the world and what's going on in the so-called ivory tower, which has increasingly become neoliberalized as well as commodified. So if we don't draw upon these critical lenses that underpin the Radical Black Feminist Sociology Project. And I don't think the point was ever to redeem sociology, at least it wasn't my point, but it was to interrogate and to move the narrative in its very, very narrow incarnation. So I would leave it at that. That would be my response.
Does anyone else want to add to that?
I would just echo that Black feminism reminds us to be undisciplined and undisciplinary. Just as we are also creating canon, we're also disrupting and reimagining and rebuilding. And so remembering that we are free to be undisciplined.
Yeah, thank you so much. We are ending at 11:30 PST, which is soon. And we have a raffle before we close, but I do think we might have time for one more question with maybe one more response. And this question stems to what you were just saying, Dr. Dill, but in thinking about what sort of radical practice is yet to be incorporated by Black feminist sociologists in and outside of academia. This is also a type of question we have for our breakout session, but thinking even beyond our academic spaces. Are there any thoughts on that?
I think it's always important to remind ourselves that Black feminism, and I think this is what Dr. Brewer was speaking to, is not just within the domains of the academy. So much of Black feminism starts on the ground in regular, everyday women's communities, but also how we think of what is a feminist and who identifies as feminist. I often say, at least to myself, and at a conference I did last year in Paris, it was a noir feminism conference, is that, feminism for Black women diasporically placed is often something we do, not always something we identify as, right? And so, it's a practice, it's an activism within communities. My mother would never have called herself a feminist, but everything about what she is and what she do is totally feminist. And so I think, pushing the boundaries of what we think feminism is and who identifies as feminism and where feminism occurs is also important to take into account. So yeah, the activism has always, probably preceded the theorizing around it, right? So, definitely not to try to put those things in competition, but, it's definitely something grounded. And that's important to keep in the forefronts of our mind.
Yeah, when I think of, Black feminist futures, I mean, maybe because I'm a closeted historian, but I always think of Black feminist histories. And the longer you study these arc of movements, the more I see feminism as, it's obviously it's tied to the liberation of Black women, but it also is the only radical possibility for Black politics, right? So when you see, maybe because I study, Black men, and I see these multiple iterations where Black men try to take us to these neoliberal capitalist seats at the table. And it's always Black women, because they are so tied to labor, because they are so tied to the margins, that's always pulling us back to a radical and more leftist side of these movements where sort of, Black capitalism would rather just, take us to crumbs from a table. So I think about that as the import of Black feminist scholar activism, that term we were taught at Spelman, the scholar activist, that it is always about taking work that works on Black politics to move it towards a more radical possibility.
So I'm thinking about your work, Dr. Luna, around reproductive justice, right? Or the Me Too movement, or Black Lives Movement, right? Black Lives Matter movements, all these kinds of ways that we engage in activism. Or Maria Stewart, right? Love Maria Stewart. Yeah, the ways that we engage publicly in our feminisms, irrespective of time and place, or over time and place, is very key to doing and being, I think, a Black feminist.
Thank you for that, Dr. Norwood. I love to be in the same sentence as Maria Stewart. No pressure. So we're actually going to move on to the next section. And one thing we want to encourage folks to do is to still put your questions in the Q&A section. And what we are aiming to do is, in the coming months, work with some of our authors and folks who are involved with the BFS team and do some brief answers, whether written or video, to some of these provocative questions. And just based on how the volume has come together, I'm sure that folks also have some different answers. So that way you will get some of the dynamic aspect that we got to see as the co-editors pulling together all of this work. So even though we won't have another sort of formal Q&A time as part of the symposium, you can continue to put the questions in the formal Q&A part, and then we're going to be going through those in the coming months and dropping some little tidbits on the site as time continues to go. And I also want to acknowledge someone in the chat who just put in Nikki Jones. Nikki Jones, Professor Jones at Berkeley, and Professor Joyce Bell at Chicago. We thank them quite a bit in our acknowledgements because they volunteered their time, and I say volunteered their time, to help us as co-editors who were taking on a very new venture called co-editing a book, and help us sort of further winnow down. We had got over 80 submissions and we had done an initial round, and then they helped us sort of look at these things as a whole and think about gaps and see additional areas. So I just want to acknowledge Dr. Jones and Dr. Bell for that. And I believe we're going to move to another raffle, right? That's Tashelle?
Yes.
Before the bio break, yeah.
Drum roll, yes. I want to end right on time. So I pulled the next two names for the BFS book and some swag. So number 28 is Shantae Allen. I hope I said your name right there.
Monte. Is she here?
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. Okay. So yay, winner number 3. So we'll make sure to connect with you and get you that. And then number 4 is Celeste Currington. Sounds like you know them all, but yes. So these are our lucky winners, and we will do one more raffle. So stay tuned for the next part 2.
Yes, a sincere gratitude for all of you being here, for sharing your wisdom and your voices and your hearts with us. I saw in the chat that Maricela said that her heart needed this, and that's how I felt about today. But as we wrote in the book, like, this was a project that we needed. We wanted it, but we needed it in so many important ways. It has fed my soul. And I'm just honored to be a part of this journey with all of you. Thank you to the panelists, to all of our editors, all of our authors, all of our supporters, the Black Feminist Academy, all of that. We are closing this webinar for now. As you saw when you registered, part 2 is where we can really talk with one another. That is coming up. We are using breakout rooms for that, so you should have received a separate Zoom link. This will, we will log on in 15 minutes. And so do get, stretch your arms, go to the bathroom, do what you need to do, and come back on our other Zoom link and we will talk more. If you have questions, send us an email. And we have posed a chat for you all on Twitter. What has inspired you so far? Please join our Black Feminist Sociology growing movement. Check out our website, get on our listserv. We will be doing interactive things on our blog, maybe answering some of these questions on the website. So please stay tuned. Continue to ride with us. We appreciate it so much. And I hope to see many of you shortly. So I'm going to play another song.